Thank you. So everybody knows the name IBM, and everybody knows it's a big company, but very few actually can grasp the scale of how big IBM is. So to put it in perspective, IBM is roughly the size of Iceland, 388,000 people in 171 countries. And what we're trying to do by introducing design and being design-led is modifying century-old hardwiring. It's a tech company. It still is a tech company. We're 3 years in, and we're moving the needle, but it is still very much a tech company. And so what everybody asks is, well, how? How are you changing the hardwiring? So we believe that there are three elements that are needed to create a sustainable culture of design at IBM. And the first are the people. So when we started this program in 2012, or the beginning of 2013, there were 450 designers at IBM. Since then, we have brought on 750 designers, and our current number across the company is 1,100 designers. And our goal is to be steady state at 1,500 designers across the company by the end of 2018. We have the first ever formalized HR career ladder for designers in the history of IBM, starting at an entry-level designer and going all the way up to an IBM fellow. So for once, we actually have a seat at the table with the rest of the company. It's really an exciting time. So people, definitely a big part of this. I was also asked by a handful of people about how to apply at IBM Design. If you go to ibm.com/design/careers, you'll find out everything that you need there. A bit about how we choose those people. We go through 40 portfolios for every one person that we hire. And again, do the math in terms of hiring 750 designers in the last 3 years. We've been through an awful lot. And what we look for in designers are integrity, intelligence, and passion. This is really critical because it's not just enough to be a great designer. You have to be an ambassador of design within the company as well if we're going to change the culture. Second element are places that nurture creativity. So we started with the first studio down in Austin, which is where I'm based. I designed this. It's 50,000 square feet of space designed specifically to enable designers to be the best that they can be within IBM. This has everything from fluid workspaces that can be torn down and put up within a matter of moments to infinitely configurable furniture across the entire open floor plan so that people can change their environment as the work changes around them. We started with that one in 2013. We now have 29 studios across the world, all being the central focal points for practicing IBM design within the company. And third are robust and scalable practices, and that's really where I come in because I am the program director for IBM Design Practices. And as Rachel was saying, that includes IBM Design Thinking, the IBM Design Language, and the soon-to-be-released IBM Design Research. So I've said the word design an awful lot since I stood up here. And what I realized when I joined IBM 15 years ago was that this was the most nebulous word you could use besides maybe agile, where if you have a discussion with somebody about design, you don't know whether they're talking about the tools, the artifacts, or the way that people think, in the same way that you don't know if you're talking to somebody about a development methodology or a mindset when you're talking about agile. And I remember the very first meeting that I attended when I joined IBM, all the engineers looked at me and said, "What are you doing here? You just paint things up as they go out the door." And I realized that I had a second job that I needed to undertake that wasn't really my day job, and that was about educating people on what design really is. So if we go to the dictionary, design as a noun is the purpose, planning, or intention behind an action, fact, or material object. This goes a certain distance in terms of being able to explain to people what it means to practice design, because it isn't about our tools and it isn't about the artifacts. It is about that planning and intention. And a couple of years back when I was talking to Jared Spool about this, he said his definition of design is the rendering of intent. And I really love this because it can't be any sharper or more clear. and it also places the responsibility on everybody. It's just the medium that we work in that changes. You can be a designer and design in code, or you can be a designer and design pen and paper. The point is, if we're not rendering our intent, and if we're not clear with our intent, then we are not actually practicing design. So if design is the rendering of intent, then design thinking is about how we go about articulating this intent to each other, to our clients, to the people who use the products and services that we make. Design must solve a specific problem. It's evaluated at how effective it is in solving that problem. So therefore, the most important thing to do is to identify the right problem to solve. Too often, people want to rush into their artifacts or into their tools or into code and start doing something before they actually think about what it is that they're doing and have the purpose and the intent behind the actions. And this is a problem because if we solve the wrong problem, we're not giving our users what they need to be successful. And at the same time, culturally, when I joined IBM, design was synonymous with usability. And so my point was to make something usable is the same thing as cooking to make something edible, and nobody says, hey, let's go out for dinner and have a really mediocre meal tonight. The important thing is that we're giving people something more, and expectations have never been higher given the change in what's available between consumer technology and business technology. There actually is no difference. So it's our responsibility to make enterprise experiences as compelling as the ones that we have from a consumer point of view. The first way that we do this is to be authentically thoughtful. This is point one in the IBM design language. And this is really critical because authenticity is sensed rather than rationalized. It's not something that happens here, it's something that happens here. And thoughtfulness is that deliberate consideration for the needs of others and that empathic understanding of what's most important to our users. This means that you're not making it for yourself. You're not making it for the business. You are making it for the person who lays hands on it at the end of the day. And if we can get somebody home 15 minutes earlier so that they can be with their family, or they don't have to work over the weekend, or they don't have to be chained to their desk, these are all critical things that improve quality of life in terms of using these tools that are absolutely business critical. But then again, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm really excited to use this piece of business software. So the second thing about this is that we have to design for an outcome. And this was something that we actually saw as we were bringing on our young and new designers, was design was thought of as the outcome, that there was a design outcome. This is not about the design outcome. This is about the outcome that is a shippable, purchasable product or service with articulated and defensible differentiation. This is really critical. It's not just about how great it looks or how slick it is or how the interactions are put together. There has to be a real business value and a real user value on the other side. And so if the user isn't using our designs, then it's not considered an outcome. To have these two thoughts firmly in mind are critical to message this across the entire company. It level sets us in terms of what our expectations are to do good design. This is where IBM Design Thinking comes in. And this is our scalable framework to help teams understand and deliver continuously. And just to be clear, we haven't reinvented design thinking. Design thinking is practiced all over SAP, Stanford D School, et cetera. We've re-articulated design thinking for a continuous delivery world. This is really critical. The more and more that we get into this, it is not enough to be able to take 6 months upfront planning and doing the design work to then spend another 6 to 12 months building something. We have teams that are now on 48-hour delivery cycles. How do you build intention into a 48-hour delivery cycle? This is part of it. The second thing that we've done is added management practices to be able to scale design thinking at IBM. When we were first starting with IBM Design Thinking, we did plenty of talking with folks like David Kelly and Tim Brown from IDEO and the D School, and they told us the same thing. Design thinking works really great when you're inside of a small studio with about 15 people, but it gets really hard to manage when you start going past 100 or 200. And David Kelly was talking to Phil Gilbert, our general manager of design, and he said, well, here's the thing, Phil, you only need to hit 25% of the company before you hit a tipping point. And Phil said, yeah, that's 100,000 people. And David sat back and said, right, so there's a bigger challenge here. So this is what we did in service of that, adding these management practices. So there are three major sections to IBM Design Thinking. The first are the principles, the second is the loop, and the third are the keys. So the principles are the basic foundation. These are the givens. These are what have to take place across all of our teams. If we don't have this in place, there's no guarantee that any of this works. The loop is our behavioral model for continuous understanding, and the keys are these management practices that I referred to. So we'll start with the principles. And before I get into the principles, there's a little bit of common sense in all of this. If you are a practicing designer, you'll probably shrug your shoulders and say, duh, of course. But what we found is that this is actually uncommon sense, that some people needed a reminder. But more often than not, these folks have never actually thought in this way. And so part of the way that we talk about design thinking is that this gives us a way to explain to those who are not designers by trade, who are not formally trained designers, to think about solving problems in the same way that a designer would think about solving problems. So the first is a focus on user outcomes. And again, for designers, this is very common sense stuff, but to an organization the size of ours, placing emphasis on the user instead of the buyer or the CIO or the CMO was a big cultural mind shift for the company, and we're still working on it. And so the idea is that everything that we do in terms of determining the intent is in service of our user and what will make them successful. Second is multidisciplinary teams. Raise your hand if you have what could be described as, at best, a contentious relationship with the other side of the aisle, that if you're a designer, you have a sort of not so great relationship with your engineers or vice versa. Wow, only a few honest folks. Good, good. Something that we noticed very quickly when we brought on our first 60 designers as part of the new hires was there was just this huge grinding of gears between the designers, the engineers, and the product managers. Nobody was speaking the same language. Nobody valued what each other had to bring to the table, and they certainly didn't know how to make it all work together. So what we talk about here is having empathy first with each other and then for our user, because if we can't work as a whole team, we're not going to succeed as a whole team. This is really important. We have a bias towards action. Relentless reinvention is something that is absolutely necessary when practicing design thinking. You can pursue perfection, but you have to have the humility to know that you'll never really achieve it. You have to give people what they can use right now and continually improve it. So this requires people to commit to ideas, commit to approaches, and deliver something that people can actually lay hands on and learn from their actual usage, and then build forward based on how you see people react to what you've given them. So we treat everything, even shipping products, as a prototype. This provides a level of understanding and a freedom to act that is so much different than trying to get everything just right, knowing that it never turns out that way. Next is the loop, and as I said before, this is our continuous loop of observing, reflecting, and making that we call our continuous model for understanding. There's this lovely Latin proverb that when translated reads, "Nothing is invented and perfected at the same time." And this is what this behavioral model for continuous understanding is. There are three elements of the loop itself: observe, reflect, and make. And so the first, observing, immerses us in our users' worlds. It is not enough to simply assume that you know about your users. This means getting hands-on, eyes-on, ears-on with what your users have to tell you, and share this across the team. If we don't have a meaningful understanding of what they need to be successful, how is it that we are actually going to build this into the intent? And there's a caveat that I have to give you here. There are countless books, posts, PDFs that go into the artifacts of design thinking. We are not reinventing the wheel. We do empathy maps, we do affinity mapping, we do paper prototyping, and this covers the walls of our studios and our workspaces. I'm not going to talk about this, but what we have found is that there are basic questions that, if asked as a whole team, actually takes us out of our expertise and our domain disciplines and allows us to communicate freely based on what we know as individuals. So for Observe, asking simple questions like, who are our users? What are their needs? What else is out there? What ideas do they have for us? Allows us to say, we don't know. And if we don't know, the expertise on your multidisciplinary team knows what to do to go find the answers to these questions. We have over 3,000 products in our software group alone. There is no way that we can make a one-size-fits-all. This is about enabling people to act as a team and develop this as a rhythm that makes sense for their own individual teams. Reflecting is about aligning our various points of view. The loop, by its very nature, can be traveled both forward and backward. In fact, there is no true starting point on the loop. It's where you choose to start based on what your expertise is and what the problem is. And so if you have people who start by making or start by reflecting or start by observing, what reflection allows us to do is to slow down just enough so that we can get aligned and move faster, because there's nothing worse than having groups of people. In some cases, our product teams are 150 people, 200 people. If you have everybody going off in different directions without knowing what people are working on or what its purpose is, it's very hard to try to mush that together at the end and have something that hangs together in service of the user. So reflection is this moment where we slow down just enough to be able to understand where we all are. And this is where we can ask questions like, do we agree on the intent? Did we make the leap to insight? You'd be surprised at how many people conflate an observation with insight. What's critical is that as the voice of a designer, we make the leap past what we see when we observe and make a jump forward in terms of how we understand the problem that we're looking to solve. And are we ready to commit? I've also found that in some cases it's generational, in some cases it's discipline-based. People always want to keep their options open. And as a team, we have to commit and start moving forward to get into development. Otherwise, this thing will never see the light of day. And last is making. And making gives form to our ideas. There's no way that we can know everything. There's also no way that we can observe everything. And if we get stuck reflecting all the time, we're looking at our belly buttons and not getting something done. So sometimes the best thing to do is to just start making. And when we take what we've made and put it in front of people, we can observe how they behave with it, and then we can reflect on what we've seen based on what we've made. This is a flow that moves back and forth. So questions to ask during make: what's our concept, what's our story, and how do we deliver? Too often we get focused on lists of features instead of what's the reason why somebody cares, what's the why behind what we do. And the most important thing is that this is a flow. Our previous incarnation of design thinking that we published internally was represented by a series of hexagons, and everybody would say, we can't seem to get out of the understand phase, as if we ever stop understanding, or if we can't move from ideate to explore. These checkpoints ended up getting in our way. So this very intentional design of making this an infinite loop spurs teams to continually move forward on this. So next up are the keys, and these are the management practices that we use to align this across all of IBM and across territories. So this is about getting us aligned on that clear intent and purpose. The first is hills, and hills align our intent across our resources. They're statements of intent written as meaningful user outcomes. The most important thing is that this tells you where to go, not how to get there. So this is a sample hill, and it doesn't matter that you don't understand the details in this. I'm going to explain to you why this is a well-written hill. So it reads, a GMU-based sales leader can assemble an agile response team from across IBM in 24 hours without management involvement. There's a who, a very specific and clearly outlined who. This isn't for everybody. This isn't for every sales team. It's for a GMU-based sales leader, not the entire group, the leader. There's a what. Can assemble an agile response team from across IBM, not within their own division and not anywhere else, but from across IBM. And there's a wow. in 24 hours without management involvement. This is critical. There's no how and there's no when. This is all about who we're making it for, what it is that we're making, and why this is important. What is that defensible, differentiated outcome? Next are playbacks. Playbacks align us on our intent across time. Not everybody can be on the loop or in the loop all the time. Everybody has meetings to go to, places to travel. Playbacks are these moments where we get the entire team together to talk about what it is that we've been doing. It is a very intentional reflection moment spread throughout the course of any given release. This is how we get our stakeholders pulled into the loop, from the most junior of practitioners to the SVPs who are responsible for the business overall. This is what a typical playback looks like. In this audience, we have developers, we have architects, we have designers, we have business owners. And the most important thing here is that this is a safe space. There is no hierarchy within a playback. It doesn't matter what your position or your station is within the company. Everybody has an equal say, and these moments give us the ability to course correct before shipping something that nobody wants. And too often, I know I'm guilty of this. I've watched things that go out the door that I'm not proud of or I don't agree with, and this prevents this from happening by keeping everybody on the same page and being able to talk about this. And the last key are sponsor users, and sponsor users align our intent with their reality. This is different than typical user testing or focus groups. This is a program where contractually our users or potential users will work with us and our teams between 10 and 50 hours over the course of a given release. They bring their experience to what we are trying to build, and they tell us when we've gotten something right and when we've gotten something wrong, and they are hands-on with the design as well. They are drawing, they are working, they are doing this as a part of the team. This was from 2 weeks ago, where the folks from Walmart came to work with our group in Smarter Workforce. They wanted to redesign their entire hiring process, and it wasn't enough that they just wanted to give feedback on the product itself, which they use as the sort of the main thrust of how they do their hiring. They actually wanted to learn IBM Design Thinking from the team so that they could apply IBM Design Thinking to their own processes. So that's IBM Design Thinking in a nutshell. The principles, the loop, and the keys. Again, it's how we operate with one another, how we think about this while we're on the loop itself, how we are continually learning as we are making, as we are understanding, and then the keys, how we manage this at the scope and the scale that IBM does business at. And this wouldn't be much of a presentation if I didn't talk about IBM Design Thinking in use. So the name of this presentation was Realigning the Way That 400,000 People Think. We have a world-class education and activation group within IBM Design that to date has touched 25,000 people and taught them hands-on how to do IBM Design Thinking, both traveling around the world and having them come to Austin, where the main studio is. For some companies, this is more people than they will ever have in the history of the company. For us, it is a small drop in the bucket. So while there's cause for us to be excited about it, there still needs to be so much more done. So our goal for 2016 is to meaningfully educate 100,000 IBMers within the company by year's end. And we are experimenting and designing different ways to do this, where we don't have to put people on planes all the time to be able to get this done. And we have about 200 teams approximately using IBM Design Thinking on a regular basis across the company, about 50-50 split between services and product design. Some of the things that we've launched and released using IBM Design Thinking, one is Bluemix. This started out its life as we needed a catalog to be able to show people these are all the different cloud services that we have available. What we ended up making instead was a cloud operating environment that allows people to manage and maintain all of these stitched together cloud services as a platform, as a service. There's IBM Verse, which is the reinvention of our email client. The big understanding that came out of the design thinking process, and it took about 2 weeks to get to this point, was people actually don't care about the messages in their inbox. They care about the people in their inbox. And this created an alternate way of thinking. And you can see here that it is about the people who we interact with on a regular basis. It uses analytics to be able to surface those that we email with all the time. It also starts making recommendations based on new people who start showing up in your inbox. It also gives us the ability, as you can imagine, at a company our size, oftentimes we end up on email threads where we don't know half the people. So we have this feature built in where you can click a little flowchart button, and it shows you everybody on the thread, who they report to, and where they belong in the organization. It's very powerful. And last but not least is IBM X-Force Exchange, and probably one of my favorite stories about using IBM Design Thinking. If anybody has ever done any work in the security space, it's generally known as a very dry and unattractive and unpleasant set of tools. There's something like 40 vendors and 80 products, and if you happen to be a security analyst where you're tasked with monitoring security intrusions into your company, you might have 35 of these apps open simultaneously. You're pulling and scraping data from all of these different sources, and it ends up in a solitary Excel spreadsheet that dead ends on your drive and doesn't get shared with anybody else. This team, using IBM Design Thinking, started taking this entire process apart and said, what if we took some of the principles that drive people's usage of Dropbox, Pinterest, Evernote around collecting information and data and being able to share it with each other, and make a network that wasn't about who had the proprietary tooling or the proprietary data, but that if there is a security intrusion going on globally, likely it is affecting everybody. So let's make one place for everybody to get this information in one spot. And this was driven by the comparison of this to being like the Justice League, where it's all these superheroes coming together and applying the tool set with the mentality behind how these people come together to work to solve problems together. It seems a little funny, but this makes a huge difference in terms of the way that people are thinking about how we design enterprise software. It is no longer dry, Eclipse-based, Java-based stuff. This is modernized. This is responsive. It is on mobile and desktop together. So that's IBM Design Thinking. If you want to check it out, if you want to learn more, you can go to ibm.com/design/thinking. There is no secret sauce. This is what we all use at the company. It was redesigned from the ground up when we released this last January to be consumable by just about anybody. So you should be able to read this, understand it, and see how it may apply to you and what you do. And I thank you for your time and ask you to stop, think, and do the right thing.